accounting firm growth. I'm your host, Cassy Clayman. This season, we are focusing on proving your worth. Today, we're discussing becoming a visible expert with Karl Feldman, a managing partner at Hinge, the leading branding, marketing firm, and website design agency for professional service firms. A former entrepreneur, marketer, and engineer, Karl is uniquely qualified to manage Hinge's team of talented professionals and help their clients to outperform the marketplace. Karl will discuss creating impactful campaigns highlighting how marketers can help their professionals soar. Karl, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks
Before
so
we
much.
jump in, oh yeah, no problem. Before we jump in, why don't you tell me a little more about yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Cassie. I don't know, such a great introduction. A little bit about myself. I do have a little bit of engineering blood, so I love data. I have a little bit of academic streak, so I fit right in here with Hinge. I actually studied computer science, started in B2C with, global brands like Harley Davidson. I worked in entertainment for a while with Sci-Fi Channel, and then I found my way towards professional services with B2B like Herman Miller, and then eventually went into uh, engineering, construction, account finance, professional services, business development, and marketing. And I found my people here at Hinge. We're kind of, data and research geeks, but we really look at how to make that practical in the real world and help professional services really up their game. And I'm really happy to say, meeting you, Cassie, everybody involved with professional services, the last 15 some years, we've seen a lot of growth. So I'm really excited about the conversation today. And we talk about, what's different, what are the fastest growing movers and shakers doing differently than everybody else, and how the heck do you even grapple with content today when we've got AI and the world is wild and there's all kinds of uncertainty. That's a great topic we're going to be tapping into today. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And with a data background, we can talk numbers, which is sometimes it can be a little in the ether when you're talking about content and creativity.
Yep.
So it's nice to be able to bridge the gap between those data and the creativity. So speaking of, let's talk about content. Why is killer content so important? Your 2024 study shows high growth firms are prioritizing content creation above all other marketing techniques. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. It's really interesting, and I've been sharing a little bit about my checkered past. It's been the quite the journey from direct to consumer to B2B to professional services, and what's different, whether it's accounting and finance or a management consultant or any of the kinds of firms we work with, it's professional services. So the product that we are positioning, that we're branding, that we're promoting, it's actually expertise. That's why, kind of our focus, like we've written books on, and really where we focus our research is understanding the people behind the solutions and how do you elevate and expose them. And content is the most respected and credible way to do that. So however you're getting to it, whether you're finding it organically through a search engine, it's been promoted, or you're finding it in earned media in a publication, that is the way that buyers of professional services are understanding the expertise, understanding the solution that they're looking for. And, making sure that you position that correctly for the intended audience, that is really what it's about. And the research that you mentioned, this high growth study, we've done this for the past 15, maybe 16 years. We've got something like 60,000 some firms in our database, and we look at trends year over year to say there's firms and professional services that are reporting higher growth, higher profitability. What are they doing differently from everybody else? And so creating content, it's been moving up, and it's been at the top of the list this past year. I can give you a preview as we're looking and analyzing going into 2025. It's going to stay at the top of the list, but what I find really interesting are the couple things that are around it. So if creating content is a top priority for accounting and finance, firms and advisory. Right behind it are marketing and automation, social media marketing, and brand differentiation. Now, brand differentiation is probably the most strategic of that bunch, and it plays into everything. But the other two are all about promoting that content and understanding the results of that content. So I think that's really a big place that we've seen the difference between, if you call them the haves and the have-nots. The biggest difference is the haves, the firms that are accelerating out in the front of the pack, have invested in the kind of infrastructure to understand how their content is doing, how well audiences are engaging with it, and what's impacting their business, and they're able to take actions on that. And that loop is really helping them succeed moving forward, because you can have the best content, but if it's hitting the wrong audience or you're not promoting where it's engaging, it's like the proverbial tree falling that nobody hears. So that really, I would look at that data together as a whole set that tells a really interesting story.
Yeah, it sounds like, I mean, having that data and that kind of path forward helps you clear the way to what's next. It
Exactly.
sounds a little bit like you're also you're kind of touching on thought leadership. And so if we're talking about content and all of the top firms are doing this content, how are the firms differentiating themselves? Or, I want to get back to the thought leader thing, but I'm curious about if everyone's creating content, is the data different? Is the data the same? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So differentiation, it's on one hand, there are a lot of common threads among account finance, advisory, and professional services, but everybody has their unique fingerprint. So, and I think the hardest thing to do, especially when there are such good, high caliber competitors in the market, and everybody's kind of moving towards, how can we bring more advisory value, consulting, those types of things. It's important to understand what really matters in that differentiation. And it's one of those things. It's like really great to say. It sounds great when I say it. It's very hard to do, right? It's
Yeah.
what are you going to find at a firm level, maybe a practice or solution group level, and then down to the expert themselves, like the actual subject matter experts, and maybe even key accounts that are really important to your organization. How do you differentiate at those different levels? What's true, what's provable, what's relevant? How do you position in a way and, kind of hit that balance between what your buying audience is really interested in and what your organization is good at providing solutions for? You want to find that middle ground. It's one of the reasons that when I joined the Hinge team, we have like behavioral scientists on deck. We do tons of research. The data is all there really so we can find a practical path forward, and it's people we're talking about. Sometimes I think like I'm crazy. How did I end up like where it's all people, the data? It's breaking down the code of what's that behavior like. So I really think that that's the most powerful way to objectively understand what's different, is to do that kind of objective research. If you kind of follow like, here's my hunch, and you follow like the loudest voice in the room, you could be right, but you're taking a big chance.
Yeah. Well, so what are some of the essential elements of creating that impactful content that you're talking about? Content that effectively showcases the expertise and resonates with those target audiences. Yeah, like what are the essential elements of creating that content?
I think it comes down to understanding your audience and really meeting them in what they care about. I think whether people tell you or not, they're always thinking in the back of their head, like, why do I care? What is this? How does this help to solve my problem? There's a little bit there. So kind of understanding that first and what issues you're actually speaking about solving, that's probably the most important thing. Behind that is that ability to measure the results, because even with the best hypothesis, it could be off. Could be language that's not quite hitting the mark. Could be that issues. In the time right now, the issues and things move around so quickly. What's hot, a couple weeks ago, it might might just fall off the radar this week. So keep that loop really tight and understand how it's being consumed. And it's probably another podcast, but I'm not even adding in here like AI and that filter. That is changing the way that audiences are consuming data, how they access data, and even how that data is being produced. I mean, we're running a bunch of multivariate testing on how you work with AI as a co-pilot and protect, PII and all of those fun things, because we work with everybody from government contractors to tech. So we have to be on point with that. But, it's interesting, like what's said and what's not said. Google says, they don't bias, but then data comes out like, yes, they do. And there's hands on the wheel kind of driving preference. And no, we don't score this AI result higher than another, but actually results show that they do. So there are all of these factors going in that just, the basic gist is keep it on a short loop and understand what's working and what's not. But targeting is the biggest thing out of the gate. Are you hitting the audience that you care about? Who are the influencers in your buying decision? Who are the decision makers? And you got to think of it as groups. It's not, the relationships of rainmakers. Those days have gone. It's always groups, and there's a lot of folks in the wings that you've never spoken to, and they probably have hands in that buying decision.
Yeah, it also sounds like, knowing your target audience is key because that audience is going to resonate with different types of content depending on who they are. So again, back to that data mixed in with creativity, those two, it sounds like you're saying those two sort of combine to make a dream team in marketing and branding.
That's right. I mean, I always think of these, I like the power of three, but there's a balance between strategic and tactical. How are you understanding the science and then the feelings, right? What are the engagement points? How are you balancing these things all the time?
So, I mean, you were just talking about how the needle changes. We know that LinkedIn, the algorithm for time is completely different from one day to another. Same with
That's right.
Instagram. So
That's right.
what strategies can firms use to ensure that their content remains relevant and valuable to their target audience?
hmm I mean, it goes back to the audience. It really depends on the audience. Like even in social media platforms like LinkedIn, if there's one that we care about in account finance or any professional services, that's it. There's also a lot more static on the airwaves today than there used to be. The algorithms are always shifting, as you alluded to, and they reward different behavior. On platform engagement, these systems are always looking to learn too. I can tell you firsthand in the back end, the kind of profiling data that you can find in these systems is pretty deep. So how these systems are learning about the users and able to target for advertising and things like that, um, that's really important. So I think it really comes down to what are the audiences that you're speaking to. That will inform how to do that. But examples could be social. I think a trend that we're seeing like this past year and heading into 2025 is, where organic search engine activity used to be really powerful and like a primary source. There are a lot of filters in place now. So it's still a crucial foundation, a backdrop to build upon. But we're seeing more and more that targeted paid advertising and a really integrated approach that blends online and offline activities, digital PR, even things like retargeting. So once you know your audience and they're engaging, how can you stay in front of them online and different platforms? Those things are really helping to drive faster results, more attributable results. And in some ways, that's professional services, I think, catching up to where B2B and B2C have been for many years. So we're seeing that happen quickly. I think we can't ignore like the pandemic as a catalyst. It didn't change trends so much, but it definitely accelerated. I mean, a lot of folks that we've spoken to that, they would never buy into these things. Now they say, oh, people do pay attention to LinkedIn. They are responding to these things. We have generated, multi-million-dollar leads, through this platform. I wouldn't have believed it a year ago, but that's what a global pandemic does when everybody's online. So
Totally.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, it sound, the moving needle and the changing what behavior is rewarded. I mean, that's a constant shift. And it sounds like, as long as you have the expertise and the confidence to be that thought leader utilizing these tools, I mean, having the utilization of these tools is going to help you be successful, staying true to yourself and then using those tools to market. I'm curious if you have any examples of some successful content marketing campaigns that have demonstrated that knowledge and delivered tangible results.
sure. And I think, in the spirit of the ever-changing trends happening, I can think of two pretty current examples that maybe illustrate some of what's going on in this multi-threaded promotional strategy, and even how some of the foundations might pull forward. One in our industry in account finance, there's a firm that we've worked with for years, but they've really tipped into leveling up their whole intentional marketing program visibility, um, building a lot more visibility for their experts. And I would call them a boutique advisory and accounting financial services firms with roots in forensics accounting. But they are also, and this is fun, they're researchers as well. Like some of their services are researchers. So we often find ourselves, and it's one of the things that I love about our business is we're professional services too, but you get a tough audience when you're researching for researchers. It's like how doctors and nurses are like the most difficult patients. We love them as a super awesome engagement and discourse. And there were things that they inherently understood because of the work they did, but also other challenges. And we're working together for a reason. So it's like the totality, as we're talking about like the campaign, what do you do to understand? It's not just the promotion and training their experts and everything, but it's also how are we measuring this? How are we reporting on this monthly, quarterly, and so on? We worked with them kind of across the board on generating content. So providing examples, working with their subject matter experts that then they could replicate in teams. So we would interview, build articles, white papers, guides with their team, and then have different cohorts, different teams riding along that were doing the same as part of a training program. And through that, we built up, okay, here's a multi-pronged approach that encompasses digital PR, in-person events, paid and earned media, and search engine. We had already built up a lot of the organic foundation that I talked about, but this was really tipping into how can we activate this online and in person. End of the day, as we got through this, we really balanced like what's the voice of these experts, and some were better with video, right? Some were better in person. Some were better writing behind a keyboard. So we're able to first assess what are the kind of skill sets and comfort level of the leaders and the face of the solution, and then map that to different channels. Once we got through that, I think our time on site as just a broad measure, reviewing and engaging with this content that we've been talking about, it increased like 3.5, 4 times what it was last year as we started to build these tools. The biggest thing though, like that's great. That says, okay, we've got an engaged audience. We're seeing this is coming from the right places. We're coming in from like industry publications that we care about. But at the end of the day, 130% increase in digital leads. So leads coming through the form that you can track through the different channels. That's like the holy grail. And I give big kudos to the team because they gave the leap of faith. We had kind of that foundation put in place. Well, we had some pretty intense conversations about here's what we would do, here's how we measure that, and here are the checkpoints. If this is working, let's go. this isn't working, let's dial back and we'll try A, B, or C. And there were a few adjustments along the way, but I think it was a great example of that kind of short decision loop where we really understood, like, there were some paid campaigns that went nowhere because it sounded like a great idea. Business developers are like, yes, people are looking for this. They have buying intent, and no. So we were able to back away from those in a couple of weeks, but we had 3 or 4 ready to go in their place, and those had traction. I think that's a good example because before it sounds great, like, oh, let's do paid advertising. Before you do that, make sure you have the ability to track and really understand, are these the right, are we attracting students? Are we attracting real business? Is this actually moving through to the intent? Because that money, the burn, will go very quickly, and professional services still does not have the tolerance to spend to learn. So you have to be as precise as possible out of the gate to really ensure success. Another one I can, oh yeah, I'm sorry, Casey.
Oh, no.
Yeah. I was going to say another one I could think about, and this is like a shorter one, but kind of speaks to the trend. It's not accountant finance. This is an environmental engineering firm. They do a lot of like, and this will give you a little teaser. Indoor air quality was what they do. So you can imagine during the pandemic, they were well positioned to get some visibility. And we've been working with them for, gosh, 6, 7 years prior. They had already grown, but when the pandemic hit, they were just positioned for this. They ended up attracting national clients through that because of organic positioning. They ended up doing all the testing sites for CVS up and down the East Coast. We're on, national news talking about what are the different protocols to control indoor air and how many times air should be cycled through things. So that subject matter expertise, their visible expertise, they really shined bright during that period. But what's interesting, and I think for our conversation about content coming after that, so you have that kind of that big lift, and then we get on to other things happening in the world. But in our kind of integrated campaigns and understanding and how can we build from that kind of lift, they've tapped into a more integrated approach. So started doing different types of advertising, targeted paid campaigns, building on that organic reach, leveraging some of the articles that they had during that pandemic into other publications. And that has resulted in a continued lift for them. So where a lot of folks that didn't kind of see that trend through, kind of had that blip and balloon and then flattened out, these guys have has really continued on with that.
Yeah, so it sounds like, a few things. I heard a few things from that. So, we all know sometimes marketing is trial and error, but you got to be ready to do the new thing once the error, if it doesn't work. So if you're able to be adaptable and agile, that's perfect. And then I also heard, with both of those campaigns that the people we figured out what their skill sets were, and that was the most effective because that was what they were the most comfortable with. And when we're talking about blogs, white papers, short form videos, long form videos, articles, webinars, it kind of runs the gamut of what your skill set could be. So as long as you have someone to help you find self-awareness, to know where you do shine, then whatever you try is going to be successful. Yeah. So, in terms of formatting, it sounds like almost anything could be successful as long as you have the data and that you're tracking. I mean, we all know that if you're trying to track, if you're trying to do anything in life, you don't know if you've made progress if you haven't been able to track from where you started.
That's right. And it's, you reminded me of something. I'll go back to data. One of the things that we've seen is that, overall loyalty in consultants and professional services, it's been on a downtrend because there's just a lot more competition. But on a plus side, all of professional services, including accounting and finance and advisory firms, that relevance, like what they assign professional services firms in terms of how relevant are we in solving their problems, has increased. So we're covering more ground. That's a real benefit. So I think, thinking about that, you have more authority to be that information source. I mean, where we used to see in our research that, what publications do you go to solve your business problems? And we're like, Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, those types of things. Now we see more and more professional services firms being mentioned as information sources. McKinsey, the Big Four, and then in different lanes, specific professional services. If you start talking to healthcare, when we've spoken to CEOs of large, conglomerates that say, we signed to teams, go out and find consultants that are putting out good content and digest it for us. That's where they're receiving the most current information. If you need encouragement to consider quality content and invest in that, that's it. I mean, you can go shoulder to shoulder with national publications because you know what to talk about in a specific industry.
So yeah, I'm glad we came back to this. So what you're talking about is thought leadership. So, this whole time there's so many tactics out there for marketing and branding and business development, but what this is coming down to me is thought leadership, being a visible expert. So, can you expound on getting them on board? Can you talk about, sometimes, and I don't know, some people, at least in my experience, some of these professionals don't think that they're well spoken enough, or I'm just an accountant. And, we know that that's not true, that they're
That's
very
right.
smart and very well spoken. So can you talk a little bit about that thought leadership and getting them on board and kind of balancing all of that with everything else that a marketer might be doing?
Absolutely. And Cassie, I think you captured it perfectly. So often in our industry, it's almost like self-deprecating, like, oh, my voice, it's not that important. It is. This book that we wrote, The Visible Expert Revolution, gets into a little more detail about what types of experts there are. And we tried to break this down. Of course, there's a wide range, but just like some folks are more comfortable behind a microphone or a keyboard or video or not, you also have different styles. You could have the laser that focuses on this is all I do and I know this subject matter all the way down. You have others that might bridge different kinds of expertise together, regulatory and, other things, technology, bringing those pieces together. But, I think finding that really helps that expertise to shine through. So you want to find the ways that these visible experts are going to be powerful in relaying that differentiation and the solution. And then is that going to showcase that for the audience? Can they speak at that level? Some, like we talked about before, some might be more technical in nature, some might be more high level, but kind of matching that up, it's like a matchmaking exercise. That's really a key piece to it.
Like any good thing, go back to the basics, go back to
Yeah.
what you know and what you're good at.
Yep. Yep. It's more complicated, but that complication, it helps to stand out from the fuzz. I think quality has to be number one these days. I think it's gone are the days where kind of checking the box and getting some quantity of content out there would make a difference. Now, I think, especially with the advent of AI, you've got a lot of beige out there. You've got a lot of things that sound good. So kind of doubling down on that personal voice, authenticity, differentiation, and that strategic side of things, that's really what is behind. You have all the tools to measure, but that's a common thread in what works. And it's kind of basics, but it's one of those things. Again, it's easier said than done. Make sure
Yeah.
that you're matching up to the team.
Totally. Don't worry, we'll be talking about AI in another episode of this season, so tune in for that later.
Great.
Well, that's all the questions I have for you. I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about your website, LinkedIn, anything that might be relevant that you'd like to share with our audience before we wrap up.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Cassie. I mean, this has been a fantastic conversation.
Yeah.
Hopefully, Hinge is pretty findable. Hingemarketing.com is our URL. We have a lot of great content that we publish. It's kind of like I said, our business model, one of the things I appreciate is we have built-in empathy. We're professional services ourselves, so a lot of the techniques we advise on, we do ourselves. I mean, I know the pain and the reward of balancing speaking engagements and keynotes with, delivering with clients and, joining podcasts and, kind of, breaking bread with the community and know those challenges, the billable, non-billable. I think we live in that world, but I think the website is a great place to look. I'm pretty findable on Google AI filter or not. Karl Feldman with a K, managing partner here at Hinge Marketing. But if you have any questions, please do feel free to reach out. There's lots of opportunities there, whether it's a form or chat or give us a call. But if you have questions or any of this data is intriguing to you, I can assure you there's plenty more where that came from. And we're always happy to catch up with folks in our industry.
Thanks, Karl. That's really generous of you. Thank you so much for an enlightening conversation today. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Thanks, Cassy.
Sure. That's it for another episode of Amplify, the podcast for accounting firm growth. A big thanks to all of you for listening today, and again to Karl for a great conversation. If you like what you heard, we'd love a review on the podcast platform you're listening to us on now. And be sure to listen to the other episodes this season. Our theme is Proving Your Worth. You can learn more about Amplify and our past seasons on accountingmarketing.org. Look for the podcast under publications. I'm Cassy Clayman, marketing coordinator at Topel Forman, and if you want to connect with me, you can reach out on LinkedIn. Thank you again, and we look forward to having you join us for another episode soon.